Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Special Education News and Noteworthy, the podcast where we break down the latest news impacting special education across the country and talk about what it means for students, families, educators, and advocates. I'm Paige Fitzgerald.
And I'm Kate McGalby.
Before we jump in, a quick reminder that you can follow Special Education News and Noteworthy wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave us a 5-star rating. It helps more families, educators, and advocates find these conversations, and it supports our mission of making special education information more accessible.
This week, we're looking at a significant shift in federal disability rights enforcement, concerns about preschool exclusion, new scrutiny around use of force tool being used in schools, an IDEA violation involving predetermination, and a major investment in special education programs in Connecticut. So let's dive right in.
Our first story comes from Disability Scoop. The U.S. Department of Justice is reversing long-held positions in court cases involving the rights of people with disabilities to receive services in their homes and communities rather than institutional settings. The shift follows a June Justice Department memo challenging the long-standing interpretation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 associated with the Supreme Court's landmark 1999 Olmstead versus LC decision. The Justice Department is now putting that position into practice. Federal officials recently changed their stance in a Florida case involving children with complex medical needs who are living in or at risk of entering nursing homes. The department also withdrew this month from a Texas case involving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in nursing homes. Disability rights advocates are concerned that these moves could signal additional changes in federal enforcement across the country. It is important to note that the laws are still the laws. Existing regulations remain in effect, and people with disabilities can still bring cases in court. What is changing is the federal government's role in enforcing those protections. Advocates say that matters because the Justice Department has the resources and authority to investigate systemic problems across entire states in a way that individual families and smaller disability organizations often cannot.
This was a lot to process and a lot to figure out, what the ripple effect is in special education. The biggest concern is that many of the students that are affected by these cases are the same population are served by IDEA. They're kids with significant medical, intellectual, developmental disabilities. So a retreat from these community-based service protections could actually increase pressure towards more restrictive placements, right? Is that really what this is coming down to?
So really, it's coming down to the fact that what's at risk is a backslide into institutionalization again, where if we have this law in place that says that you have an obligation to make things accessible for people, to make it so those places where adults and children with disabilities can live in their communities. So right now what's happening is essentially the Justice Department is saying, well, we have this memo that's saying now that we don't necessarily agree with the fact that this is the obligation. And these cases that we took up for individuals to have access to their communities, we're actually going to drop them or we're going to change our stance on it. And so that then really creates a significant problem because right now schools do have an obligation under the law to serve students of all kinds of disabilities. It does not matter, right? You can't say we're not going to take this kid, they have nowhere to go, institutionalize them, right?
Yes.
That's not what we do anymore. And that's one of the big fears of we're trending toward that way of now saying that, okay, this is your legal obligation, but our own government, who's in charge of those legal obligations, is not backing up the enforcement of that. And of course, we still have advocacy organizations that are fighting for this. Individuals still can, but that's not the muscle or the manpower of your own government coming and saying, hey, that's not okay. We're taking you to court over this. It's just not the same. And so that's the worry that although the law is not changing, who's going to enforce it? Right? So that's really the big fear here, the big issue, the fact that they're pulling out of these cases that have to deal with the right to be living and being served in your community.
Yeah, but I think it's important for any listener to also, you stated it, but just to reiterate this, is that just because of this, state protection and advocacy agencies and legal disability centers that are supporting families, they can still be resources. So, like, there's a lot of stuff going on with the Department of Justice, but there's a lot of supports that we can still access right now. So, just continue to keep that in mind. Okay, our second story comes from the Northeast Times in Philadelphia. Parents are urging Philadelphia City Council to ban suspensions, expulsions, and other forms of exclusion from preschool programs across the city. During a recent City Council Education Committee hearing, several parents described experiences in which their young children with disabilities were sent home, pushed out, or told that a preschool could no longer meet their needs. One parent said her autistic son was told that he could no longer attend his preschool on his very first day because the program said it did not have resources to support him. Philadelphia already prohibits city funded pre K programs from excluding children or sending them home early, and the Philadelphia School District does not permit preschool expulsions. But parents and advocates say that what's sometimes called preschool pushout continues across different types of early childhood programs. Providers who testify also described another side of the problem. Many say that they want to serve children with disabilities, but lack the adequate funding, the training, and timely access to early intervention supports. Parents and advocates are now calling for broader protections against preschool expulsion, along greater investments into the resources providers need to meaningfully include children with disabilities.
Yeah. I think one of the most important takeaway for parents here is that be on the lookout for that preschool push out. It's not always necessarily it saying in big bold letters your child can no longer attend here.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does look like constantly being asked to pick up your child early,
Hmm.
right? Being told for them to stay home because a certain staff member who usually works really well with them is not there that
Yeah.
day. That is also not okay. That's also not allowed, but it's sometimes how preschools will sidestep their obligation to
Hmm.
have your child at that school because they're not counting it as, a suspension or an expulsion or anything like that. There are kind of ways that they can try to sidestep it, and a parent might not really realize that their child is now basically not being told that they're not able to access learning like their other peers can because they're being constantly picked up for behaviors and this and that. No. And important to know, the Philadelphia schools are saying that's actually not allowed. We tell preschools that they can't do that, but there's that big gap of what they're not supposed to be doing and getting the training for the staff members to say, okay, we're capable and qualified to support these students as they are, because obviously we don't want our students in unsafe situations and environments, but they
Right.
have a right to be in that classroom. So that needs to be priority number one, and to be fixed is get that training for those staff members so that these children can not only be in the school, but be in the school safely, be in the school and be getting an educational benefit.
Yeah.
Because it's not enough to just keep them in there and be like, well, we can't kick them out, but we're just going to have them sitting in a corner entertained, and we're not going to challenge them or do anything because we don't know how to work with them.
Right. Right. I think all the points that you made are really true. We're giving our opinions to these stories, and I think so often there are two sides. Like, if we were at that preschool and we had somebody coming through the doors who needed extra supports, obviously, like, we're resourceful, we're to figure something out in that moment. But I also understand the perspective from that preschool that they were blindsided at that time. Maybe they didn't have the resources, but I feel like there's two sides to the same problem. Like, the school feels like they might not have the resources right in that moment. But on the other hand, the parents are doing the due diligence, having the child go through early intervention, recognizing that they have significant needs. Like, the parents want their kid to have their needs met from day one. And I think until we can pull our resources together, there's going to be different opinions.
Yeah, and I mean there are two sides to every story, and that's true, but at the end of the day, legally, they're
Legally,
required to have that child in that classroom. So
absolutely. Yeah,
mm, that it's
100%. The
it's
answer is not kicking that child out. The answer is being resourceful and figuring it out until they're in the right placement or whatnot.
yeah, absolutely, and being collaborative.
Exactly. Yeah,
Collaborating with the parent of, okay, let's figure out how we can make that work,
sure.
and with knowing that our teachers need more training. We're going to work on getting them more training.
Absolutely.
Tell me
Yeah.
what works best for working with your child to support them being here. Let's
Yeah.
figure out how this works.
I
Because
think
right
you said
now,
like a veteran teacher in that moment who has had experience working with similar type needs, having maybe like a little intervention session with a newbie teacher to say like these are the things that have worked in the past for me. This is
hmm,
you're just having somebody else to collaborate with and to give some ideas in the interim period.
yeah, yeah, great idea. Okay, our third story comes from Nebraska Public Media. The Omaha Police Department has released new information about two instances in which school resource officers used electric shock gloves on students during the 2025-2026 school year. The device is called the GLOVE, which stands for Generated Low Output Voltage Emitter. It delivers electrical pulses directly to the skin and is marketed as a non lethal use of force tool designed to gain control through pain compliance. In the first incident, police said an officer used the glove for approximately 2 seconds while detaining a student who had been fighting with a security guard and was attempting to flee. The second incident occurred at Omaha Public Schools' Integrated Learning Program, a specialized program for students with social, emotional, behavioral, and learning needs. Police said the student made verbal threats, threw a chair that struck a security guard in the head, and then punched the guard. An officer deployed the glove twice while detaining the student. At the Omaha Police Department's 34 school resource officers have been trained to use these gloves. The use of the devices is now drawing increased scrutiny, including questions about transparency. At least one Omaha school board member said she was unaware that the gloves were being used in district schools until local media began reporting on them this month.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a lot to sit with. I
hmm
think what comes out to me the most is that second incident happening in the integrated learning program specifically.
hmm
It's built for kids who already struggle with emotional and behavior regulation. And now we're talking about a tool that works by causing pain until someone complies. Like it just feels like it's just not the right move.
Yeah. And, when they talk about these gloves in the article, they're saying that it's different than a taser because a taser, when it has a shock, the electrical shock goes throughout your whole body. Whereas this glove, it has a shock that stays in the area on the surface of that skin rather than going to your whole body. So they say it's safer. And sure, it might be safer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay to give these to so many school resource officers and have your own school board be unaware that school resource officers that are in your schools are using these compliance enforcement tools. It's very important that parents are aware of what could possibly be used on their child should their child be this level of disruptive that a school resource officer decides to intervene. And absolutely, schools should be in the know and okaying what is and is not okay to use on a child who is in distress.
Mhm.
And that's not saying that school resource officers don't have an obligation to protect the students, to protect themselves. But I think a real issue here is, once again, what they're saying, the transparency.
The transparency piece, yeah, and the oversight, to have someone say that they didn't even know that the gloves were still in use until
They didn't even know, not even still in use. They didn't know that they had them, period. They didn't even know
yeah,
like the gloves existed.
right, right, until local media reported it. I mean, I would be furious.
Yes.
I'd be furious. Yeah, it's bad, but
Yeah. Yeah, and we've had stories in the past about like increased presence of school resource officers, police officers like that inside of schools and that excessive use of force on these students. So it once again brings up the question of, okay, what kind of training are these school resource officers getting for children with disabilities, which include emotional, behavioral disabilities, and how to interact with them and how to de-escalate them too? Because to your point last week when we were talking about, I believe, talking about restraints, it is hard to de-escalate someone when you yourself are escalated.
right, right,
So
exactly.
that's important as well.
Okay, our fourth story comes from Arizona Luminaria, and it was also distributed through the Associated Press. The Arizona Department of Education found that the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and the Blind violated IDEA when it restricted placement options for certain students while preparing to close its West Side Tucson campus. Blind and low vision students, along with students receiving residential services, have been told that they would need to attend schools within their home districts for their 2026-2027 school year. But following a complaint filed with the state, investigators concluded that the school had predetermined those students' placements. The state found that families were not given the full continuum of placement options that should have been considered through the IEP process. Instead, a broader administrative decision about where students would go had been made before the individual IEP teams considered each student's needs. The Arizona Department of Education has appointed a special monitor to oversee corrective actions, and affected student cases must be re examined. The home district for several former students has also said new IEP meetings, which will be held to review the continuum of placement options and make individualized decisions about each student's least restrictive environment.
I mean, this is not surprising that the districts are now being told to redo this because
Mhm.
you can't just say, okay, this place is closing down, so now you guys all just go back to your home district because that's not individualized at all to their needs. They're sorry, rather their closest school to them because that school might not have the types of supports and services that they need to access their education. So, I mean, this was something that was really like once again, you have people making a decision not really thinking about the children that it's affecting.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad that they are rectifying this, being mandated
Yeah.
to rectify it.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that nothing changed here until a family filed a complaint. And,
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
really takes that parent perspective to be like, wait, this nothing something's wrong here.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be from school or administrative or district wide. So, this if anything, this story is just another reminder that parents, you are your children's biggest advocates. Like when you feel in your heart of hearts that something's up, you need to advocate for them and figure out what's really going on.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Our final story this week comes from Fox 61 in Connecticut. Connecticut is awarding $10.6 million in state grants to 41 in district special education programs through the first round of a new incentive grant program. The goal is to help districts build and expand special education programs so that more students with disabilities can receive services within their own schools and communities. About $8.9 million will go toward programmatic costs, including planning and startup expenses, additional materials, and professional development. Another 1.7 million will support eligible capital improvements and infrastructures needed for the programs. Connecticut officials say the investment comes as districts face both an increasing number of students eligible for special education and rapidly rising costs associated with some out of district placements. State leaders say the grants are intended to give districts more resources to strengthen their own special education programs, reduce class sizes, and expand opportunities for students with disabilities to receive individualized support while remaining connected to their local school communities.
Um, I think this is a nice change of pace from talking about, shock gloves. I'm happy to hear something different than the heavier story, but Connecticut is where I'm from right now, so this makes me super happy. What makes me most happy is that most of the money, it's not just a building or equipment grant, right? It's
Mhm.
something, a lot of the money is going towards staff and training and materials, which is really talking about like long term capacity. I think in the past, if not, it's just been conversations with Paige and I where we've talked about how districts are spending so much money sending kids out of district because they
Mhm.
don't feel like the needs can be met within the schools.
Yeah.
But, like, if you look at it this different perspective, it's like, well, if you're putting all this money into staff and training and materials, it could mean that more kids are being served closer to home, and that's always like a win-win. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've taken on a lot of advocacy cases in Connecticut, of course, and it's a huge trend of outplacement because public schools are not able to meet those needs of some students with disabilities. And this is actually a conversation I remember having with an advocate last year of just the amount of outplacements in Connecticut. It is a strain on the budget, and unfortunately there aren't those programs right now that are capable of meeting those student needs. So I think this is really putting money in the right place
yeah.
because of course families want their child to go to the school that's closer to their home. If it's supportive of their child's needs, nobody wants to send their child on a bus for an hour to 2 hours
Yeah.
to go to a specialized outplacement. Absolutely not. So this is really great.
Yeah. I love that we're ending on feel good stories lately. So keep up the good work, Paige. Those are this week's top stories in special education. If you'd like to read more about any of these stories that we discussed today, please be sure to check out this week's edition of Special Education News and Noteworthy newsletter. where we've linked each of the original articles. And remember that the newsletter goes beyond our 5 headlines that we discuss here on the podcast. This week, our Special Education Insight takes a closer look at predetermination, what it actually means, the difference between a school coming into an IEP meeting with a recommendation and coming with a decision that's already been made, and what parents can pay attention to during that decision making process. You're also going to find our picks of the week, including an upcoming virtual conference for families navigating special education and a picture book that celebrates stimming and neurodivergent self regulation.
And if you're finding these conversations helpful, please follow Special Education News and Noteworthy wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. It really does help more families, educators, and advocates discover the show. And if you know someone who would benefit from these conversations, we would love for you to share the podcast with them. And before we go, we actually wanted to leave you with this week's quote, which we usually only share in our newsletter, but I thought it'd be really nice to share it on our podcast as well. It is from Amanda Griffith Atkins. And it is real disability acceptance is not pretending there are no limits. Recognizing limitations does not make someone less valuable. You don't have to pretend disabled people can do anything in order to see their worth. And you can find Amanda on her Instagram account at amanda.griffith.
Thanks so much for spending your part of your week with us. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay vocal, and take care of yourself.
Bye, everyone.